Okay, this calculator tutorial is going to walk you through competency by competency in the PINK review that we've been working on for the last 13 classes. I went ahead and sort of pulled some questions so that I could show you how to access those features on the calculator. On this, the thing I would start off with probably is just resetting the memory so that it's back to factory. So if you go into that menu option that I showed you just there, you go into F5 to reset. You want to reset the main menu, which is F2, and it's going to ask you, are you sure? And you go ahead and put yes, and then you can hit exit and get out of this. So if we go back to menu, we can go to the regular calculator mode, and it should be all clear. And every setting that was initially messed with should be back to factory settings as if you just took the calculator out of the box. A couple of things that I would do though, I would go into the graphs. When you go into this default setting, it's going to change your viewing window into some funky size. So I like to change it to the standard viewing window, so it's a 10 by 10. If your graph doesn't fit, then you can manipulate that window in this menu here. And then the second thing I want to do is go into the regular calculator. So I'll go into the menu and go into the regular calculator, and then I want to go into my setup. So if I hit shift menu, I want to access the menu that allows me to change this into complex mode. Right now it's in real mode, so that means that if you have any problems that have an I in it, it's not going to work. So we would have to hit F2 so that it accepts the letter I. So now you can do any math that involves an I, and you can solve any problem that has imaginary solutions. So that's a good thing to have. So the first thing we want to make sure you know how to do is access your matrix stuff. So let me change this back. If I was to do this first problem, for example, and I probably won't even do the actual problems, I just want to show you how to type stuff in. So what we'll have to do is to select a matrix, we'll go into math, and then we'll hit MAT for matrix, which is F1. And it has some preset sizes for your matrix, but if you don't see the size there, it has to be row by column, you would have to hit F3. So this first example, it's got a 3 by 2, so I enter a 3 and then a 2, and then hit execute, and it should put in that matrix for me. And then I want to multiply by a 2 by 3, so I'm going to have to go and do 2, execute 3, and it should match exactly what it looks like on your paper. Now, just to show you some stuff, I'm not going to type in the actual values. I'm just going to put in a bunch of 1s and 2s in this one, and it's going to be pretty boring, but this is what ends up happening when you solve it. So the one thing that I did want to point out is when you multiply the first matrix, it has 2 columns, and the second matrix has 2 rows. So when you multiply, it's multiplied row by column. So the column on the first matrix has to match the rows on the second matrix in order for it to work. If I was to change this matrix to a different size, which I'll do now, let me delete this matrix, and let me just put it as a 2 by 2. Actually, I'll do it as a, I don't know, I'll do it as a 3 by 1. So I'll put like 5, 5, 5, and then hit enter, and it'll say dimension error. Dimension error means that it's not the right size, so it can't be done. So if that was the case, you would just select undefined. Now, with multiplication, like I said, the second number of your size has to match the first number of your size on your second matrix. So that was a little confusing, but pretty much if I was to go and type it in, if your matrix is a 1 by 2, the second one is going to have to be a 2 by something. And that last number could be anything. It could be a 5. It doesn't matter. The fact is that these two right here match. So that's what makes them able to be multiplied together. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. Now, when it comes to like adding and subtracting stuff, there are some rules on your matrix where they basically have to be identical. So if I go into my matrix, if I'm going to add a 2 by 2, I'll put in just a bunch of 1s again, and I want to add, and let's say I put in a 2 by 1, and I'll put like 2, 3. It's going to give me that dimension error because with addition and subtraction, your matrix has to be exactly the same size on both matrices. So let me show you an example of what that might look like. So let me delete this. I'll put in another 2 by 2, and I'll put 2, 3, 4, 5. And now you can see that we actually get an answer. So a couple of things, other things about this matrix stuff that you have to know. You have to know how to find an inverse. So if you're going to find an inverse, first of all, inverses only work on square matrices. So like 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 by 3s. So if I wanted to find the inverse of something, I would just enter in the matrix, and then I would raise it to the -1 power. Now there's some math that's involved here, but the calculator will do it all for you. So that's really nice to know when you find an inverse. The third thing you're going to have to know is how to find a determinant. Remember that when you're finding a determinant, you're going to have to find the determinant button. So you're going to have to hit Shift. Make sure I got this, Shift. No, actually it's not Shift, it's Option. And then there's the matrix function, which is F2. And then you can see the determinant is right there. So if I wanted to find the determinant, I have to enter in my 2 by 2. So let me go ahead and put in my 2 by 2. So I go math matrix 2 by 2, 2, 4, 6, or 5, 6, 56. Okay, we'll do that. And then it'll calculate your determinant. Remember that determinants are allowed to be negative. They just can't be negative if you're using a determinant to find the area of a triangle. If you were going to find the area of a triangle, you would also have to put in a 1/2 before. So let's say I have 1/2, and then I would enter in the determinant. So the determinant is Option, matrix, determinant, and then I have to go exit twice to get back to math matrix. And I have to have a 2 by 2. I'll just put 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I get an answer of -1, I have to just switch it to a positive because area can never be negative. So that's the tutorial on the matrix section. So let me go next to Comp 3. So in Comp 3, you're going to have to know how to type in a piecewise function. So if we go into our graphs, first of all, the graph has to be solved for y, which all three are. So if I type in x plus 1, I have to use a comma and then a bracket, which is Shift plus. The first spot's going to be blank, and then we're going to put in a -1. We close the bracket with Shift minus. So that's my first graph. Then I enter my second graph, which is x squared minus 1. Now, when it's got two numbers, this is actually pretty easy because all you have to do is put the two numbers in the bracket. So it's going to be -1, 1, comma, 2, and then Shift bracket. And then the third one is going to be -2 x plus 7, comma, bracket. And then we have the 2, comma, 2, blank. Blank is just infinity. There's no infinity button. So the pattern for this is the first one will always end with the number, and the last one will always start with the number inside those brackets. Now, if you don't put those limitations on there, it's going to show you the answer like A. A is automatically out because that's not even a function. These are supposed to be functions, and they have to pass the vertical line test. So you can see like as long as you put your restrictions on your domain, which is the stuff in the brackets, then you're good to go. See if there's anything else in this section. Yeah, I think that was it for that section. So now if we go into systems of equations, you can actually use the calculator to graph a system of equations. You just have to know the F5 button, which is the G-solve button. Also, you would have to solve for y. So if I solve number 23 for y, it would be x squared plus 4x, and then the -1 would come over. And the second equation would be 3x, and then plus 1, because you'd have to add 1 to get it to the other side. So it puts both graphs on the graph, like on the grid. So you go into your G-solve, and if you just hit G-solve twice, ISCT means where they intersect. So one of the answers is at -2,5, and then if you toggle over using the right arrow, you can find the second answer at 1,4. You can also use this calculator for a system of 3 equations, but that you can't graph on this one because it doesn't do 3 dimensions. So you want to make sure to go ahead and get out of this menu and go to the regular calculator. So there's 2 ways that you can solve a system of linear equations. You can go into the solver, which is the EQUA option in the menu. And we would do the simultaneous solver, which is F1. It's going to ask you how many unknowns. This has an X, a Y, and a Z, so we would use 3. And then you would just type in the numbers. So it's 2, 1, -3. Oops, I forgot I have to hit enter. 2, oh, what am I doing? 2, 1, -3, 1, 3, -1, 4, 6, 1, 2, -1, 9. And then if you just hit the execute button, it'll show you all 3 answers. So that's one way you could solve the system. Another way you could solve the system is by using matrices. So if we go into the regular calculator, if you want to do this using a matrix, which, I mean, the calculator kind of already did that when we did the solver, another way you could do that is by finding the reduced row echelon of that matrix. So you would hit options and you go to math, kind of like you're going to the determinant, but then you would hit F6 for RREF. Then you would go back and enter your matrix. So it's math matrix. This matrix would be a 3 by 4. So we'd go 3 by 4. And then we type in just the numbers in the front. So it's 1, no, actually I keep doing that. It's 2, 1, -3. And then we would hit 1, 3, -1. And then we would hit 4, 6, 1, 2, -1, and then 9. And if you just hit enter, this right here, if you notice this diagonal, this has to be there. These all have to be 1s. This is the X, this is the Y, and this is the Z. If any of these 1s are missing, well, then there's no solution. But you can see right here, we got the same answer as the last time using the solver. X is 1, Y is 5, and Z is 2. So when you solve a system of inequalities, we'll go back to the graphs on that one. So I'll go into the menu, I'll go down into the graphs. You're going to have to make sure that you solve all of these for Y first. So if you solve that first one for Y, I think it's going to end up being, actually, you know what, you have to go and change so it's not an equal sign anymore. So if you go into type and hit F6, that symbol is going to flip when you divide by -1. So we need the less than or equal to. It's going to be F4. So if I subtract the 2x over and then divide it by negative, it's going to be a positive 2x. And then that positive 2 is going to become a -2 because I had to divide by -1. So that's the first equation. Second equation is going to be x greater than. So I have to hit F6 twice. So it's greater than or equal to. So I hit F3. And then I have a 1 there. And then for the third one, it's going to be back to a y. So I go back into the type. It's going to be y greater than or equal to. And then I just type in -3. And then it'll show you the region of the overlap of all 3 graphs. So that's pretty easy. Okay, next section. This is where you have to do the NCR. So I'm not really going to do the entire problem. I'm just going to show you where to access the NCR stuff. So if we go back into the menu and go back up here, let me delete all this so it's not confusing. So if we want to go into math, there should be a button. Well, actually, I'll skip to that. There's a sigma problem down here. So if we see F2, that's going to be where you enter all your problem. There's been some issues with typing stuff in, so I'm just going to show you how to type stuff in here. That 3 on the outside actually has to go inside of these parentheses here. So we would put in an extra set, put in the 3, then put in the 2, and then I would have to go close the parentheses so that way I can raise it to the x power. So I'll put an x here. And the big thing here is you just got to make sure that you use an X in that spot also, because if you use 2 different letters, it's not going to solve it. So it'd be 4 here, and then 6 here, and then there's your answer. Now, if you're going to do the formula, for example, for like number 20, you're going to want to just make sure to clear all this out. Hang on a second. Clear all this. F2 twice, and then yes. So when you do this, you're going to go into your calculator to probability. Let me show you the button sequence again. You hit options, F6. If you go into probability, the NCR button is here. So we use that for finding the first three terms of the binomial expansion. So let's say the first term would be 5, choose 0. And then there's other parts to this, but I just want to show you how to access the C. So that's that part right there. Okay, so that should be pretty easy. And then we've got polynomial functions. So this right here, maximum problems, you can actually use your graphs for that. So let me delete all this. I'll go into menu and go into the graph. So I'm going to delete all these graphs. You're going to have to be real careful here because we mess with the type and we change them to inequality. So we have to go into the type and change them back into equals. So for example, this problem right here is negative 1/4. And then it's x squared. So we got to scroll over. So we're going to have x squared. And we're going to have plus 9/5 with the x. And then plus 2. So you're going to see a parabola that's upside down. And this question is actually asking you for the maximum. So if you go into the GSolve button, which is F5, there's a max button. If you hit it and you're just patient, you're going to see the x value. The x value is the horizontal distance. So the ball would be 3.6 feet away from where you kicked it when it reaches its max height. And if you want the actual max height, it would be at 5.24 feet above the ground. Now this calculator and this equation, if you go into GSolve, you can actually see where the ball hits the ground and you would use the root. So anytime they ask for the zeros or the roots, you could just hit GSolve and go to F1. Now, if they were asking us where the ball is on the ground, we would actually not use this answer because we don't use negatives. The time starts at 0, so we only work in that first quadrant. So the ball would hit the ground after 8.178 seconds. Now, the last thing I'm going to show you is how to find all of the zeros. This equation solver thing is amazing. If you go back into your equation solver, this is a polynomial solver. And the polynomial solver will solve any problem that has an exponent in it. So since this one has x to the 4th, the degree is 4. And then you have to use the values. You have to use the values over here in front of this, in front of the x's. So we would use 1. There is no, actually, let me go right below it so that way I can show you. There isn't a single x to the 3rd value. So we would have to also enter 0. And then we would put in -5. And then we put in 0 for x to the 1st power, and then -36. So that's how we're going to have to type it into the calculator. Also, you can only do this if the equation is equal to 0. So if there's any additional numbers at the end, you're going to have to either add them or subtract them over before you can use the solver. So if I type in 1, 0, oops, I forgot, I have to hit enter or execute. Then 0 is execute again. Actually, hold on a second. 1, 0, and then we have -5. And I go over to the right, hit execute, and I have the 0 one more time, and then I have -36. Then it's gonna hit execute one more time, and then you can scroll through and it shows you the 4 answers. Now, if you didn't change your settings in the original setup, so back in here, if I go into the menu, I have to go into the regular calculator. So let me go into that real quick. So if I go into run math, if your calculator setup is not set up to accept i's, so if you say like real, and then we go back to that solver, go back to the equation solver. If you try to do that same exact problem, degree 4, and it's already in there, it's only going to show you the 2 answers. And the reason why is because when it's set up into real answers, it's not going to show you anything that has an I in it. So that's why in the very beginning of the test, you want to make sure you go into your settings and switch it into imaginary or complex numbers. So I'm going to change that back real quick. So right now it's on real mode. Real mode means it doesn't accept the i's. So then you put it so it says a plus bi, and then you should be good to go. And last thing is how to graph logs. So I just want to show you how to access that. So if you go into your menu go into your graphs. Let's delete this guy. So if you want to hit a log, you're going to have to go into options. And then if you scroll to the right, actually it's in calc, sorry. If you go into option calc, and then you have your log AB, so that way you can change your base. So this would be 4. This is going to be X. Actually, that's not the X we want to use. We want to use this X, and then we're going to put -2. Now, if you notice, when I type it into the calculator, it automatically puts parentheses. This problem here, technically, it's got parentheses just around the X. So you have to be real careful with that. So if you hit execute, then it shows your graph. Just remember on these graphs, you guys, there's asymptotes involved. So it actually cuts off this graph right here, but this graph goes down forever. And I think that should be it. So that's pretty much everything you need to know for the calculator. And that's going to help you hopefully on the final. So hopefully you found this useful.